Welcome, everyone. My name is Kimberly Doris, and I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation. Today's program kicks off a new series for us called Community Conversations, and today's topic is Navigating the New Normal. For more information on Graves' disease and thyroid eye disease, you can check out the resources there on your screen. Our website is GDATF.org. So it's important to note that for a lot of patients, they get diagnosed with Graves' disease, they pick their treatment option, and they move on with their lives. And you don't see those people posting on the internet or having discussions in groups like this. But what we hope to do today is highlight some of the issues that patients can experience, even after thyroid levels are stabilized, and perhaps find some common threads, and maybe even some ideas that might be of interest to the research community. So I'll let everyone in the panel do a quick introduction. I'll start, and then I'll try to go clockwise based on what I'm seeing on my screen, although that might be different from your view on the screen. So again, my name is Kimberly. I was diagnosed with Graves' disease in 2007. I took anti-thyroid meds for 7 years, took methimazole, had 2 years where I was euthyroid with no medication. And then I started a slow slide into hypothyroidism, which took a couple of years to sort out, and finally found a stable dose, knock on wood, which is where I am now. So again, I'll go clockwise order based on what I'm seeing, and hopefully that's the same view that everybody else has. Laquilla, would you like to start?
Hello, I'm Laquilla. I was diagnosed with thyroid and eye disease and Graves' disease in November of 2006, but they discovered it was all due to hypothyroidism. I had gone so long undetected with both of these diseases, so it caused me to lose my sight for over 7 years, but thanks to the Graves and Thyroid Foundation, they got me to the doctors that I needed, so I regained sight in January of 2012.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Tanya, would you like to do a quick introduction?
Yes, I was diagnosed with Graves' disease in 2016. I was on a really high dose of methimazole, probably really close to going into a thyroid storm when I started. So they got my numbers back regulated. In 2017, I started with a thyroid eye disease. Mine was pretty serious. Like mine didn't bulge as bad, but my optic nerve was being compressed. So anyway, I had to get that treated. And I was on a really low dose of methimazole for several years until actually this January, I've kind of relapsed and slid backward, and been dealing with that for the last month. So it's been a roller coaster. It's been smooth until recently. So I don't know why or what I've done to have that happen, but that's where I am right now.
Okay, thank you. Christine?
Hi, yeah, thanks for including me. So Graves' disease came on in 2009, and I had both the Graves' disease and the thyroid eye disease. They came together as a little package. And they come on very strong. The endocrinologist said it was the highest number she had seen. So it was significant. And I used methimazole for about 4 years, and I got side effects from it. So I had to set it aside and just went without anything for a couple years, which was a bit rough. Then I found some better solutions. So yeah, and right now my thyroid has been at a normal level for 4 or 5 years with no medication. So, but I know that could come back. So I'm very vigilant.
Okay, thank you. Vicki?
I'm Vicki Grant, and I was diagnosed with Graves' disease in the fall of 2019, but it started with really painful eye. I felt like I injured it somehow, but it wasn't until April, after I spoke with somebody from GDATF who just happened to ask about how my eyes were, that I finally got to see an ophthalmologist that told me I also had thyroid eye disease. Currently, my thyroid has been well managed, I think, and my endocrinologist is weaning me off the methimazole. We're going to see if I can go into remission. TED is still a problem, but that's me.
Okay, thank you. And Terry?
Hi, I was diagnosed finally in 2009 with Graves' disease. My numbers were so high that when I finally saw an endocrinologist, he did the dye test, and within a 2-week period, I had radiated iodine. And that was 2009. In 2013, I was diagnosed with TED. And in 2015, after trying to figure out what was wrong with my legs, I was diagnosed with Pre-Tibial Mix Edema. So I got the winner on that one.
Trifecta.
So anyway, my levels have been stable on the Graves for about 8 years now. We've Synthroid, 100 millimicron a day. And thanks to the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation and doing my studies and work, I saw Tepezza being in trials. And I ran off after it, and I did do the infusions last year.
Okay,
And
thank
it
you.
made a huge difference.
And I'm so sorry. My screen got cut off, and Roxanne, I did not see you when I was doing introduction. So if you wouldn't mind doing a quick introduction, and please accept my apologies.
So I'm Roxanne, and I was diagnosed in 2019 with both Graves' disease and thyroid eye disease. And that was after a 2-year search and going to 8 different doctors and being dismissed completely. And things got worse and worse. And I finally was diagnosed. I did get the Tepezza, and I did have all of the side effects. But for me, I thought it's 5 months out of my life. I am so wanting to get beyond this that I was willing to put up with all of the side effects. And I've had surgery for the damage that was done to my eyes. And I feel like I'm on the other side
A couple
of
of
it.
times, for those that aren't familiar, Tepezza is a medication that was approved for thyroid eye disease, and it's delivered via infusion over a period of weeks. And just a full disclosure, the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation does get some funding from Horizon Therapeutics for our educational programs, but that does not affect the content that we produce at all. That's which remains independent. Okay, and I will just note, we had a couple of panelists who had to, unfortunately, had to drop out at the last minute, but I do want to mention that although Graves' disease primarily affects women, it does affect men and women, and it can strike at any age, even though, typically women in their childbearing years, that's the most common group that gets an initial diagnosis, but young children can get it, seniors can get it. So I'd like to thank everybody again for their time today, and we'll start off with a few questions. So I think in the introductions, we kind of touched on this, but what in general are your biggest challenges at this point in your Graves' journey? You've gotten the diagnosis, you've been to a period of stable thyroid levels, you might have come out of that, but you're a few years into it. So what do you think the biggest challenges are at this point?
Well, Kimberly, for me speaking, my biggest challenge is keeping the strabismus under control. Mm-hmm. For some reason, I am badly double vision. Today is a good day, but normally I'm seeing 2 of everything. Like when people call and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "Watching all 4 of these TVs." And that's,
oh my goodness.
That's because my left eye see 2 and my right eye see 2 of everything, and they're both underneath one another. So if I can stop the double vision, I wish that I could be a person to take the Tepezza to see if we could get the double vision under control, but I don't think that's feasible for right now.
Okay, thank you.
For me, the challenge is trying to manage both of them. My antibodies are very high, and so I'm still struggling with both of them. I've been off of the methimazole. However, I feel awful, and I know that I need to get back on it. And so it's a learning process of advocating for myself, knowing what I'm feeling, believing what I'm feeling, and then addressing it with my doctor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if we're not talking about, if TED's kind of a separate disease, I think for Graves, for me, what I'm struggling most with is weight gain, that it doesn't matter what I do
Mhm.
and how hard I work at it, I can't seem to get rid of it. And there are other lots of things like fingernails that are worthless and hair that's fallen out and,
Mhm.
you know, everything I can kind of handle one at a
Mhm.
time, but they're all together.
Mhm.
And the weight is the one that probably bothers me the most.
Yeah, for sure. It's and I've been through that experience of, you know, going through and buying clothes in a whole different size, and then you go to another size and another size, and it's one of those things where they, you know, what we hear is, oh well, as soon as your thyroid levels are stable, then we should lose the weight and your weight will stabilize. And you know, from personal experience, I can tell you that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a struggle. And even with a Synthroid, your energy level is never what it used to be. And I was a ballet dancer, and I just don't have the energy to do what I really want to do anymore. And I know it's because you're controlled by one pill and you're always in a state of hypothyroidism. And so you have to navigate around that to be productive and as Roxanne said, you have to be your own navigator in this. You have to listen to your body. You have to talk to yourself and not just take everything that all the doctors are telling you, but do your research and continue studying to find out how to overcome all these different obstacles.
I
Yeah.
have a question.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I wanted to know if anyone on the panel, other than myself, if you are struggling with thyroid eye disease and Graves' disease, are any of you all diabetics as well?
I'm pre-diabetic. Actually, after I did Tepezza, my blood sugar raised and it's still high. And it's been about, I think 4 or 5 months since my last treatment. So yeah, I'm sort of starting to struggle with blood sugar.
And see, that's the problem for me. They have to be so careful of how they treat me with the disease because I'm insulin dependent 5 times a day. So it's a lot of medications that'll be beneficial for me, but they can't give it to me because I am a diabetic.
Mm-hmm. And that is one of the things that they monitor closely with Tepezza is blood sugar to see if that goes up. And that's interesting, Tanya, that it sounds like you had new onset. Most of what's in the literature is people who were diabetic and then had to adjust medication as they went through the course of Tepezza.
Yeah, and I think the other issue that I've been struggling with ever since I was diagnosed with Graves' disease is my blood levels will be normal, but I still have symptoms. I have not slept a full night since probably before I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. And in addition, I continue to struggle with heart palpitations or fast heart rate, like no exercise tolerance. And I'm hot, like I'm cold and hot constantly. And I think that, and my doctor just dismisses it like, oh, your numbers are fine, so you're fine. And so, I'm basically in this weird, like, okay, so I just live with it. I take propranolol, and a low dose of it, and he's actually allowed me to take it 2 times a day, and that's helped me a lot. That's all I found that will help me so far.
And I was actually going to talk about this a little later in the program, but it's kind of a good segue. So we, the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation has a moderated closed Facebook group. And we did a poll in the Facebook group recently to say, you know, what are some of the symptoms that you're still struggling with that you think might be related to Graves, or you wonder if they are related to Graves, and, you know, what are those symptoms? And so I'm going to go through those real quick and see if some of these resonate with the group. So the top 5, fatigue, number 1. Probably a lot of us can relate to that. Number 2 is brain fog.
Yes.
Yeah. I see lots of people nodding. And, I think a challenge with brain fog, and I heard a doctor mention this in a panel one time. If you're a doctor and you've never experienced brain fog and somebody says to you, I have brain fog, how do you process that and how do you help them deal with it? So if you've experienced that, can you maybe give like an example or two of what brain fog is to you, to kind of help the medical community understand what that is and how it impacts your life?
I can address that. As you saw when I first spoke, I lose my words. And it's very concerning to me because I am older. And so I'm so afraid that when I say this to the doctor, they're going to naturally think, oh, it's your age, and that happens. But I know it's not my age, as with a lot of these symptoms that we've addressed. It's, something that I'm trying very hard to manage and will continue to try. But yeah, it's very concerning.
Okay, thank you. And anybody else examples of brain fog? And I'll give you a couple of my own. Even before I got diagnosed with Graves' disease, I was in a job where I had to do like really complex spreadsheets. And even before I knew I had Graves' disease, I would be sitting there looking at these spreadsheets that like I would do the same analysis every single quarter. I had done it for years. And all of a sudden, like I'm looking at all these numbers going, oh my gosh, these don't make sense. So that's kind of a piece of it. And then, also maybe it's more memory, maybe it's more focus, but it's like I'm writing down my to-do list and I write down call. And then before I finished writing out call, I'm like, wait, who was I writing myself a note that I was supposed to call and now I've forgotten. So any other examples of brain fog and, how we can like maybe explain that a little bit better to somebody that's not experienced it?
I know.
Well, Kimberly. Oh.
Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking if you look at the side effects of the Synthroid and the generic brand levothyroxine, it tells you that it takes away your short-term memory. If you're taking this medication, on a regular basis, I take 112 per day. And in the last election in the state of Maryland, when I went to the voting booth, this is true brain fog. When I got ready to go and get my ballot to vote, they ask you your name and I could not tell them my name. Someone there who knew me said, you mean to tell me you don't know your name? I said, honey, if you understood what I was going through, you would forget your name too. So what I had to do was pick out my driver's license and show them who I was. And I mean, eventually it came back to me, but I couldn't tell the people my name.
Yeah, and I have not heard of that as a side effect of Synthroid, but let's circle back to that in a minute. Any other examples of brain fog before we move on?
I was just going to mention just losing my train of thought. Just kind of like have it in my head and all of a sudden it's gone.
I've just found that I make lists all the time to keep myself on track. So I'm constantly writing down where I'm going, what I'm doing, so I have it in front of me. Not that I get lost, but I know that I can't retain it as long as I used to. Dates and times of that nature.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just going to give one more example, and it was before I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. And it was so concerning to me because I would be thinking of something and I literally could just see that thought fade away. And I couldn't grab it. I could not grab it. I knew it was leaving and I couldn't grab it. I did talk to my endocrinologist about this, but I said, I'm really afraid. I've never told anybody this, but I'm going to tell you. And I told her what I just said. And she did reassure me that it was a symptom of the Graves.
And I have found with the Synthroid, most of that has stopped. I do have found during the pandemic, and we're more isolated and we're not as social as we used to be, that there are more rounds of a little bit of that than there were before, the just not socializing as much.
So any other thoughts on brain fog before we move on?
The only thing I would add is that I'm not quite as good at multitasking as I used to be.
Mhm.
I just recently started a new job that's very challenging, and I'm definitely not the person I was
Mhm.
prior to. Like, I can honestly say that. And
Yeah.
even with children, it's hard to like focus, like at the end of the day, on all their conversations and what they're trying to tell me. And I'm tired, and then I can't sleep. So I think part of my problem might be the sleep. Like, I'm just
Mhm.
not getting enough good rest. And maybe that's all of our problems too, because it affects that.
I did find after a year, after the Tepezza, I know you're 4 or 5 months after, a lot of those symptoms of what you're describing dissipated almost completely. I mean, I have a few here and there, and I know what it's attributed to, but in time I found that they dissipated. I don't know what your Roxanne's time frame has been on the infusions. So
Yeah, I've been done with the infusions for a year, and I did find little by little a lot of the side effects and the problems that I was having with Graves and TED I'm pretty much back to close to normal now, except for
think
the brain fog.
I agree. My nails came back, hair, eyebrows, everything. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say Tepezza was a pretty good experience for me, like very tolerable.
Wonderful.
I would do it again in a heartbeat, knowing what I gained out of it. The side effects were rough, but they're well worth the price of admission.
It gave me hope. I mean,
Yes.
and everything else that it did, it gave me hope. And that was something that I had lost after dealing with all these symptoms for so long with no diagnosis.
Right.
I agree. And the other thing it did with the Pre-Tibial Mix Edema, it cleared it up, which was a saving grace. It has come back slightly, but nothing like it was before.
That's interesting. And for those that don't know, pre-tibial mix edema is it typically shows up on your shin. Terry, I don't know if that's where it happened for you,
Ankles,
but
shin.
it's a rash that it has it's red, but it has the consistency of an orange peel that appears on the shin.
Well,
go ahead.
I grew lesions and they're hydraulic acid, which produces big knots. And actually it's the same thing that I'm producing there that they use for Juvederm. I wish I could just draw it out and shoot it in the right places. That didn't work. So I have to have cortisone shots to get rid of the lesions.
Yeah.
And
are you seeing a dermatologist for that, or is your endocrinologist able to treat it? So a dermatologist.
Took me 3.5 years to have anybody figure out what it was. All the specialists told me, you're dying from cancer, sorry. And
oh my gosh.
I kept going and going and going. And finally, when we moved to North Carolina, I went to an old surgeon and he said, we're going to do a biopsy, send it off. And by gosh, it was diagnosed.
Interesting.
You got to keep at it. You just have to keep going.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're back to our top 5. Number 3 and number 4, if you combine them, it would actually be number 1, which is muscle pain and weakness, and then joint problems. Does that resonate with anybody on the panel? I know for me, I have had, since the Graves diagnosis, I've had left shoulder, I've had right shoulder, I've had 2 rounds of physical therapy on my right knee, I've had a round of physical therapy on my left knee, I've had a wrist issue that took about 2 years to heal. Does anybody else on the panel have experience with those joint or muscle issues?
Every day.
When I get up in the morning, I'm really, really stiff. And that's been a new onset, I think, within the last year, probably. My hips hurt when I get up, not my shoulders and my feet. Like, I'm having trouble, like, with my, I don't know what you call it, like the arch of my foot. And I've never had anything like that before. And again, you don't want to blame, it's hard to figure out if it's your age or if it's the Graves.
Right.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it is. Any other comments on muscle joint issues?
Stiffness in the morning, my right hand isn't working as well as it should, and I play piano, so it shouldn't be behaving that way. So, but I never attributed it to Graves. So I thought it was old age. So I'm going to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those things that we, you know, when we start coming together and talking about these issues, you know, I mean, maybe it's not, there are other issues, you know, there's rheumatoid arthritis, for example, but, you know, it would be great to see the medical community take an interest in, oh, how, you know, maybe this is something that's correlated with Graves' disease. So number 5 on the list was hair loss, and it sounds like some of the panel members have definitely experienced that. Although, so interestingly, when we hear from people, usually that tends to resolve itself as thyroid levels stabilize. But based on this poll, it sounds like there are some people that are still struggling with that. You know, even after getting to where labs are in the normal range. And then I'll blow through these next few really quickly, and then we can discuss if any of these resonate. Heart palpitations was the next one on the list. Tanya, you mentioned that. And insomnia was the next one after that. You mentioned that. Exercise intolerance, sinus congestion, irregular menstrual cycle, early menopause, memory, which we kind of talked about, weight gain, which we talked about, and nausea and gastrointestinal disturbances. You know, do any of those resonate or ring a bell? Do you have experience with any of those?
I can always tell.
So
I can always tell when my levels are off, because I walk around literally with a low grade nausea all the time. And it just seems like that's going hand in hand with Graves for me, and it's a constant, and I've kind of learned to live with it. I'm aware of it. But then some days that nausea will just take me down, and I just cannot manage it. And it's just always that nauseous feeling. It's never that I'm throwing up or anything. It's just that terrible nauseous feeling that just takes me down, and I have to lay on the couch all day.
So any other items on the, oh, go ahead.
Yes. So, Christine, so I had the IBS came at the same time, digestive trouble, came on the Graves' disease and the thyroid eye disease. It was probably the most prominent thing that I've experienced, and it's been like long, you know, just ongoing. A lot of the other symptoms that you're talking about, when I first got the Graves' disease, I had a very healthy lifestyle. I still do. Very healthy lifestyle. So it was surprising that I would get an autoimmune like this. But I had been through a pretty traumatic situation, and it came on the heels of that trauma. And so but the IBS came with it, and that has never gone away. Even though my Graves, like the numbers, for about 5 years, I've been in the normal range and no medication at all related to Graves' disease or thyroid eye disease. And I still keep my really healthy lifestyle. And I think that has helped me greatly, because a lot of the symptoms of Graves' disease I did not experience. And I think even though my numbers were super high, and I think it's because, you know, like when I first went to the endocrinologist, I was swimming the mile every day. And I went there on my bicycle. And she didn't think the numbers belonged to me. She wanted me to retest. And I know that they're really my numbers. But what I decided to do is that I didn't want to give up my life. So I wanted to keep the good life that I was building. And I just had this tremendous determination to just keep going. And so I've maintained this healthy lifestyle, but I had to find some answers because the medication wasn't working for me. And I did like 5 years ago, just, you know, by reading a lot of research and talking to doctors and putting all the different threads together. And then the Graves' disease just like evaporated. But I know that it could come back. And that's my biggest challenge, is that I'm, you know, right now going through a crisis time. My husband's a carpenter. He's a wonderful carpenter, but he fell off a very tall ladder, broke both legs.
Oh my goodness.
So it's been, yeah, it's been pretty unsettling time for us. But I know when I go into a time like this that I have to be extra vigilant, because even though psychologically I can pretty well manage it, my body doesn't do as well as I do, as well as like psychologically.
Yeah.
So I have to just be extra careful to take care of myself, because I do believe that this could come right back on, and I want to make sure that that does not happen. So I just have to like double up on everything I know.
Yeah. And I think it kind of steals your peace of mind a little bit too. You know, if you feel like maybe a little bit of a heart flutter, or you feel too hot or too cold, and it's like, you know, okay, am I going through another round of this, or you know, is this another autoimmune disease that I'm dealing with? Which we'll touch on that in a second. But does anyone have any other items on the list that you kind of related to? For me, one of the weird ones was sinus congestion, and I heard somebody. I was on a panel on thyroid eye disease, and somebody mentioned sinus congestion, and I kind of went, oh wow, yeah, I have that. And that was interestingly one of the top items in the poll. And I see a few people nodding that.
Oh, definitely. It's there. I found, well, we're not supposed to say, but just good saline solution really helps decongest.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
Okay.
And a great ENT.
Yeah.
But I did
Yeah.
want to say that Tanya had mentioned stress and trauma within the family can trigger a lot of these symptoms and or exacerbate them as well. So I agree, you have to be vigilant on taking care of yourself. You know, when you lose your parents, or you're moving, or you're dealing with children, all of those things affect your whole immune system. And they're just not, I don't think the doctors are addressing that aspect of it. I've been trying to get them to look at vitamins or other things to strengthen the immune system within the Graves cycle, if that makes sense.
So I think that,
So I totally agree
oh,
with
go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Carrie just said, because for the going through any kind of trauma, what getting the Graves' disease said to me is that I can be susceptible to autoimmune, not just only Graves' disease, and that I have to be like really extra careful. And it is an immune problem. Like I never had goiter, or my thyroid actually looked really good. It went after my eyes. Mostly my eyes were the greatest, problems. And I've had 6 surgeries on my eyes because of the thyroid eye disease. This is before Tepezza. So, but being very vigilant and taking that self-care, to me, I think is the greatest need. In the medical community, to be aware of that, but also for all of us that have Graves' disease, is that it's like night and day, the difference when you take care of yourself, how much it can help. And that's in our hands, and I'm really encouraged by that. So, yeah.
So let's talk about autoimmunity. I do want to point out that with autoimmune diseases, it's not that our immune system is too weak, it's that our immune system is misdirected. And so, it's identified, for example, the cells in the tissues behind the eye somehow as foreign instead of self. And so, it's a lot of people think, well, if I just make my immune system really, really strong, that fixes the autoimmune piece of it, and that's not necessarily the case. And in terms of, we don't discuss supplements at the GDATF, just because we want you to talk to your own doctor about that and test for deficiencies if you need to. But I will mention that my endocrinologist regularly tests my vitamin D and vitamin B, and recommends supplementation based on where my levels are. And that's what we want people to do, is to work with their own doctors and say, is there anything else, bigger picture that we can be looking at. But to go back to autoimmunity, has anybody else been diagnosed with an additional autoimmune disease? And Laquilla, I know you have, correct?
Yes.
And that was you got a diagnosis of myasthenia gravis, is that right?
Myasthenia gravis, and now Cushing's disease.
And Cushing's. So what was that process like? Did you at first write it off to the, Graves' disease, or were you able to go to your doctor and say, this is something different and I need you to help me get answers? What was that process like, getting a diagnosis?
Actually, it was on New Year's Day, 2019, I think. I went to the emergency room. My face had shifted and I was beginning to look and feel weird. Luckily, a Korean doctor walked in and he said, I can tell you right away what's going on with you just by looking at you. And he said, you have Cushing's disease. So I was like, well, what's that? So of course I'm Googling and I was like, oh, this is a dog's disease. How in the world because if you go and look up Cushing's, all you see, everything is there about dogs having Cushing's disease. So I had to begin research even further to find out what it is. And it makes lumps come all over your body. And it's not, and they go and they move about within your body. It could be your face, your shoulder, your arms. And one doctor told me that it's kind of hard to treat this disease because it does hurt.
And so, but that was after the myasthenia gravis diagnosis. Who diagnosed the myasthenia gravis?
Dr. Kahana.
Wow, who is an eye doctor, if you're not, for those that aren't familiar with him.
Yes.
So, wow. So he was able to tell just from talking to you that's what was going on.
He did a lot of strenuous tests of the eyes and everything before they came to the conclusion. It was a whole team of doctors. And that's when he told me that's why they couldn't figure out what was going on with why I looked the way I look with thyroid and Graves' disease, because the myasthenia had set in.
Okay, and that's and that can also affect the eyes, but in a slightly different way. So that's interesting that's.
See, even though I had bulged out, you couldn't tell because the eyelids began to thicken and look like they were burned and they were closing. So it was kind of hard for me to open the eyes. That's how they realized it was myasthenia.
Okay. Has anybody else been diagnosed with another autoimmune disease? Christine, so was that an autoimmune diagnosis when you had the, you said, did you have was it IBS that you got diagnosed with? Oh, I'm sorry. What was that? And that was autoimmune?
IBS. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else on the panel?
I've always had IBS. I mean, since early adulthood. And I guess I never really realized it was an autoimmune, but I've always had that. And there are all kinds of autoimmune disorders or diseases within my siblings. So we all kind of tend to have the propensity for it.
Yeah, and so that's really one of the challenges is you see these new symptoms come on and you think, okay, is this the Graves' disease or is it something else? And so it's always a good idea to instead of just living with them and go, oh, I'm getting older, or oh, it's the Graves' disease, or oh, it's menopause, which a lot of us are in that particular phase of life. It's really important to bring these symptoms to your doctor and to be really as specific as you can with them. So for example, a symptom journal that's really, really detailed can be helpful. Instead of I'm tired, I get winded halfway up a single flight of stairs so that's a little more descriptive than just I'm tired, and could potentially help our doctors help get us an additional diagnosis if that's needed, and hopefully some treatment and some relief. So let's talk about looking back on your entire experience, what in general do you wish that the medical community knew about Graves' disease, and particularly the years after you get your thyroid stable?
Well, I think first and foremost, doctors need to listen to patients.
Yes.
It took me 3 years telling cardiologists that it was not my heart, it was thyroid. Thyroid runs in the family. I had to ask at the hospital to get a thyroid test and then they still wouldn't look, the cardiologist, they wouldn't look at it until I just kind of had to hold it in front of their face. And they went, oh my God, you know, and I just don't, and I think we have been trained to listen to doctors. If they say, this is what it is, then you go, oh, okay. And you have to listen to yourself and be your own advocate. And if you don't like what you hear, get a second opinion.
And a really great doctor, you know, will say, you know, great, go get the second opinion. You know, I absolutely want that. You know, if you're getting pushback, then, you know, potentially that's a red flag.
And I would say,
I would really like it if, like the physicians, they tell you to live a healthy lifestyle, but what exactly does that mean? What triggers Graves' disease? What kind of things do I need to avoid? And where I live, I haven't been able to get any information. And then when you look online, you don't know what's legit and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you come to the Graves' Disease Foundation or the GDATF and try to figure out, okay, what can I do to live a healthy lifestyle? And then they talk about food allergies is what I've learned yesterday. Like certain food allergies can trigger like a relapse or something like that. And I didn't know anything about that until literally yesterday.
Yeah, so I have not seen research on that. You know, not to say that it's not it's not out there, but yeah, it's and I think it's one of the challenges is we really don't have good research on a lot of this stuff. So doctors can tell us, for example, if you're taking methimazole for hyperthyroidism, don't go nuts eating seaweed snacks because all of the iodine will it's like basically throwing gasoline on a fire. So, you know, there are a few things like that we know, but there's really a lot that we don't know when it comes to thyroid and nutrition.
Well, and is everybody different? I mean, I don't know either. Like,
yeah.
Well, Kimberly, remember the last conference we had in North Carolina in 2009? I don't know if you remember. You know how we could go into the breakout rooms? There was a nutritionist there, and I still have my notes, and he was sharing with us all the things that we should not eat once we find out we have Graves' disease, and the different foods we shouldn't eat. And boy, I was blown away by a lot of the things I was already eating was probably causing more harm than good.
Yeah, but I think I would, like any list like that, I would bring it to your own doctor. So for example, if soy, you know, if you're taking replacement hormone, you want to space out soy 4 hours from that replacement hormone because it affects the digestion. Walnuts is an interesting one that is in the prescribing information for replacement hormone that can potentially affect absorption. So there are some things like that, but I don't. What we don't have is like a blanket list of here's what you should and should not eat, and we have really good evidence to back it up.
I had an ocular surgeon tell me that corn products affect TED, and that the less corn that you eat, for some reason, the optic nerve and the things that are going backwards in your eyes gravitate towards the corn and set off a inflammatory reaction. So you just don't know.
Yeah, and I've not seen literature on that. We had, so we did a Q&A with the doctor's webinar that's out there on our YouTube channel with Dr. Terry Smith and Dr. Suzanne Freitag. And what Dr. Freitag mentioned was that, you know, she will have patients coming to her and mentioning specific triggers. Like she had somebody that found that loved eating seafood and found out that shrimp could trigger a flare in their thyroid eye disease. So I think we don't have good research on it, and a lot of it is just very individual. So is that kind of leads into what are some of the specific avenues of research that you would like to see conducted in terms of these our new normal and living with Graves years after getting the diagnosis? It sounds like some research on nutrition would be helpful. You know, what foods that are helpful, maybe foods to avoid, you know, whereas we don't have really good research on that now. That might potentially be an avenue. Maybe some of the issues that we've talked about, the joint issues, the brain fog, things like that. Are there other areas where you think, wow, I would really like for a researcher to, go after this and see if we can get some answers?
I think moods would be
Something that we're So I think something that we're familiar with today is that the reversing heart disease and the whole process of reversing heart disease is a holistic approach. So there's many facets to it. It's not just only one thing, not just supplementation or the foods you eat, but it's a whole lifestyle. And I know people that have, using that have overcome heart disease. My husband's one of them. And also prostate cancer, that there's ways that you can reverse things. So I became very interested in how could you reverse Graves' disease, which so far has worked out really great. But it is a holistic approach. And that's, I think, what's really needed. And not only the research behind it, but also the support. I would love to see like support groups where people just like us could be together and could encourage each other, but we need some guidelines to work with. So I think that it all has to, come about together.
Yeah, and I think that oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, so with Graves' disease, we had Dr. Herbert Benson speak at a program in Boston many years ago, and he said something that really stuck with me. He talked about wellness as a three-legged stool. So one of the legs is medicine, and one of the legs is surgical and medical procedures, and one of the legs is self-care. So, you can't sit on a two-legged stool. You need all three legs. So I would really caution people, no, you can't just lead a healthy lifestyle and get rid of your Graves' disease. You need all of those components working together. And then Tanya, I want to come back to what you touched on with mood. And we actually, we were involved in a survey a few years ago on neuropsychiatric complaints in Graves, and there's a video on that on our YouTube channel. But it was amazing how many people years after were still dealing with these mood issues. And in some cases, they're getting, a diagnosis of panic disorder, anxiety disorder, depression. And, nobody has really taken the time to put the pieces together and go, wow, you know what, this was connected to your thyroid issues.
Well, there's all kinds of things that can cause that too. You add in your menstrual cycle, you add in, menopause, all kinds of things that are making that worse. But I guarantee you, any of our spouses would definitely tell you that Graves' rage is real. And my husband sometimes will know if my thyroid is off faster than I know. Honestly, and it is very, very temperamental. And I do think like your diet and things like that can impact that, or maybe set you off for a week, or because when your thyroid is off, it's not off for a couple of hours. It's a couple of weeks generally, and we're back to normal, or a month. And it would be interesting to see some research on that.
Well, having been through menopause, mood still there is a level of mood swing. Nothing like it was before, but it's always kind of in the back of your mind a little bit. And the fatigue thing, I do think they are all interrelated at some level, and nobody's looking at it.
So in a second, I'm going to go around and ask if everybody has any final comments that they would like to share, any advice for somebody who's kind of just entering this new normal phase of Graves' disease. But I do want to circle back on the replacement hormone. And I don't think that short-term memory loss is listed in the literature as a potential side effect, but one thing that is happening in the research world is in the past, there's been kind of this push-pull with T4 only therapy for those who are hypothyroid versus combination therapy, T3, T4. And I think we are at a point where we're going to start to see some really good research on whether, T4 alone, if there's a benefit to T4, T3 combination therapy for certain people. And this is coming out of, there was a consensus statement about a year ago from the American Thyroid Association, the European Thyroid Association, and the British British Thyroid Association, basically saying, we have not had really good research up to this point to tell if there's a certain segment of the community that could benefit from combination therapy. So stay tuned on that. So I will. I'll go in counterclockwise order this time, and hopefully I won't have cut anybody off my screen. And I'll just ask, do you have any closing comments or thoughts or any advice or suggestions for people that are in this phase of the journey? And Roxanne, I'll start with you.
Yes, one thing that I always think about is it is so important to believe what you are feeling. Your symptoms are real. And I know many of us tend to say, well, so many people have it so much worse than I have. That does not minimize how we really feel. Our feelings are true. The things that we're struggling with, they're real, and they're terrible. And don't be afraid to change doctors if the doctor isn't hearing you or it's not a good fit. You need to get a doctor that hears you and gets it.
Okay, thank you. Terry, any closing thoughts?
I agree with Roxanne. You have to trust your instincts. You have to follow your own inner being and listen to what your body is telling you. Also, make sure when you're dealing with your doctors, if you're not with an endocrinologist and you're with a primary internist, that when they do your thyroid testing, that they're doing all levels and not just the one, because some of them will just say, oh, here's your thyroid test. No. And I want to thank you all for all the work you're doing to help bring us together and advance all these issues, because we're all floating in the dark. And but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we will make it all happen if we stick together.
Thank you. Laquilla?
I was thinking about your three-legged stool, and what I would like to see is the primary care doctor, the endocrinologist, and the ophthalmologist. Since they're not under the same umbrella as a patient, they know you're suffering. I would like to see those three come together so they can come to a conclusion. And I think the primary care physician needs to start including thyroids being checked during your well woman's exam.
Yeah, thank you. Tanya?
I would just like to encourage anyone who is just getting diagnosed to hang in there and know that this is probably the worst that you're going to feel and that you're probably going to get better, but it's a slow ride to the top. You just have to be patient and communicate with your doctor and do what they say.
Thank you. Christine?
Yeah, thanks for including me in this webinar. And I think that when someone gets Graves' disease, thyroid eye disease, the tendency is to withdraw, is to pull back. But I think the solution is to reach out. There's a lot of support now. There's a lot of solutions that when I was first diagnosed in 2009 were not in existence. So there are, as you said, like Facebook groups, there's One Graves Voice. There's a lot of research, a lot of information out there, and to reach out for it and to reach out for the support instead of pulling in, because that's really where things are going to change, and there is a lot of reason to have hope.
All right, thank you. Vicki?
I would have said pretty much what all the rest of you have said at this point. I think when I was diagnosed, I personally don't think my endocrinologist treated anybody except maybe diabetics. I think he had no clue what Graves' disease was about. And I think I was part of his education. And I had to immerse myself in medical journals to understand TED and Graves' disease and how it all works. And I had no clue what was going on with me. I didn't know my anxiety was probably Graves' back then. We were all shut in and people were dying from COVID and I was falling apart. Well, that was probably Graves'. So I think you do have to advocate for yourself, but know that there is more today. And I was only diagnosed in 2019. You ladies have had it way longer than I have. So much more has come from this. And I hope it goes even further.
Okay, thank you. So on behalf of the Graves' Disease and Thyroid Foundation, thank you so much to everybody on this panel for taking time out of your day to share your experiences, and hopefully you might make the path a little bit easier for somebody that is starting down this path. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to the County of San Diego for the funding to this program, to Horizon Therapeutics and rareLife Solutions for helping us get the word out to potential panelists. And if you'd like to learn more about future programs in this series, you can visit our website at gdatf.org or at onegravesvoice.com. So again, thank you so much to all of our panelists. And if you could stick around for a moment after we formally close the webinar. Thank you so much and have a great day.